Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. For those of you who are watching me for the very first time, my name is James Ambroise, and on this channel we cover how to pay off debt faster than any other debt repayment method out there. We cover basic bookkeeping and accounting for someone who just started out a small business. We cover basic personal income tax to include a Schedule C, Schedule E, depreciation. I am also the author creator of Ambroise Method 1.0 and Ambroise Method 2.0. Ambroise Method is a revolutionary debt repayment method that offers greater results in terms of reducing interest cost compared to debt snowball, debt avalanche, velocity banking. Real quick about my credentials. I have been or am a bookkeeper and accountant, QuickBooks Pro advisor, senior tax advisor, residential real estate investor, residential property manager, financial coach. And as always, before we get started with what's on the board, please allow me to shout out the name Jesus, my Lord, my God, my Creator. Thank you. All right, America, on the board we have this hypothetical scenario of somebody who filled out one of my Microsoft Excel worksheets, and the person provided me with these figures. For that, this person has a credit card and an HELOC. The credit limit, or the original loan amount, the credit limit in this case, $12,000. APR 29.80%. Balance owed $11,200. Monthly payments charged. Well, I put a question mark because we're gonna try to figure out what the monthly payments charge going to be, or at least the interest payment portion. Okay, and this 11,200 is the previous day balance. Okay, so the balance before day one. Okay, on the HELOC, the original loan amount 10,400, APR 7.75%, balance owed 10,000. Same thing, we're gonna try to figure out the monthly payments charged on the HELOC, or at least the interest payment portion. This particular HELOC is interest only, and the previous day balance was $10,000. So the balance before day one of the cycle was 10,000 bucks. Okay. Income 9,800. Expenses 7,800. Out of these expenses, 6,200 could go on a credit card. Okay. And this amount will be moved on the 26th, on day number 26 of the cycle. Cash flow 2,000 bucks. America, remember, cash flow is the relationship between the income and the expense. That relationship calls for a subtraction operation. So 9,800 minus 7,800. That's how we arrive at $2,000 in cash flow. Okay. All right, America, we're doing a scenario for a financial coach. And the question posed to me was, James, can you show us another example whereby dumping all of the income or all of the paychecks onto a HELOC is the wrong thing to do? Okay. Now, today we're doing case study number 18, and today's date is July 11, 2025. Okay. That is the day that I'm doing the video. All right, America, I'll give you about 5-10 seconds to take a look at what's on the board, and then we're going to start with the exercise. All right, America, again, we're doing a scenario for a financial coach. A question posed to me was, James, can you show us another example whereby dumping all of the income or dumping all of the paychecks onto an HELOC is the wrong thing to do? Okay. All right, America. On the board we have the average daily balance calculator. Okay. So I have one scenario where we're going to mimic what our competitor is doing, and I have another scenario where we're gonna show you guys the difference. Okay, so here will be our competitor, Velocity Banking Group. Here will be Ambroise Method. Okay, real quick, for cycle, we have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to day 30. And again, why I stop at day 30? Because our competitor always use 30 days. Okay, beginning balance on the HELOC, because my competitor always starts with the HELOC, 10,000 bucks, 10,000 bucks. Okay. Now over here will be the credit card. Here was the HELOC. Over here is the credit card. Okay. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, all the way through day 30. Okay. Beginning balance or the previous day balance, 11,200 on the credit card. 11,200. Okay. So same thing, beginning cycle, beginning balance, purchases, payments or credit, ending balance. Same thing on this side. So cycle, beginning balance, purchases or advances, payments or credit, ending balance. Okay? Down here, same thing. Begin cycle, day 1, day 2, day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to day 30. Okay? This time, on our side, we're not going to start with the HELOC. On our side, we're going to start with the credit card. Okay? Remember, my competitor has this fixation on a HELOC. For us, okay, over at Ambroise Method, we show zero respect to the HELOC. So that's why we're going to start with the credit card. Okay? So same thing, beginning balance, purchases or advances, payments or credit, ending balance. Okay? And on that side, this time, we have the HELOC, day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to day 30, because again, our competitors always stop at day 30. Okay? This time, the beginning balance on the HELOC, 10,000. 10,000. Over here on the credit card, the beginning balance, 11,200. 11,200. Okay? So two separate scenarios, folks. All right? On top will be, we're going to try to mimic in a way what our competitor is doing. Our competitor, Velocity Banking. And down below will be what we are doing over at Ambroise Method. Okay? And in the middle will be the results. This column, this section here will be the results for our competitor, Velocity Banking Group. And this section over here will be the results for us over at Ambroise Method. Okay? All right, folks, I think I got everybody on board. Now, earlier we said that the income was 9,800. Okay. America, we know the folks over at Velocity Banking Group, they are misinformed. Okay. These folks, they always shown that the entire income comes in all at once. Okay. When we know that most employees were on a bi-weekly pay period, because the bi-weekly pay period is the most utilized one. Okay, the employer used the bi-weekly pay period more than any other pay period. So it's a bi-weekly first, then weekly, then semi-monthly, and then monthly. Okay, So these folks, they always shown that all the income comes in all at once. So for that reason, we're gonna show that all the income comes in on day one, okay? And the income was 9,800, okay? Which is a mistake, okay? Because again, most of the employees were on a regular 9 to 5, a regular W-2 or a regular 9 to 5 job, okay? They are on a bi-weekly pay period. Now we do have, like I mentioned from past lesson, we do have certain line of work where weekly is the most prevalent one, okay? But overall, most people living in America are on a bi-weekly pay period, okay? So, and again, this scenario on top is for Velocity Banking Group. So they're gonna show that all the income comes in all at once, which is wrong. So that's why we're gonna show all the income comes in all at once, 9,800. So we have 10,000, which was the beginning balance on the HELOC, 10,000, okay? Minus all of the income, 9,800. So 10,000 minus 9,800. Let me go at my calculator. That's how we arrive at 200 bucks, okay? Now on the board, I have the average daily balance calculator, including new transactions. These are the new transactions, the purchases or advances, the payments or credit, okay? Without compounding, okay? Now, most lenders, as of July 11, 2025, most lenders uses average daily balance, including new transaction with compounding. But the reason why I don't want to put my proprietary Excel formula for average daily balance, including new transaction with compounding, is because I do not want my competitor to start copying it or start stealing it, okay? So again, folks, just like I mentioned from past lesson, I apologize for not having the one with compounding on the board. And again, I hope you guys understand. I just don't want my competitor to start copying it, okay? Because remember, in the past, I had the lesson where these folks, they start emulating what we're doing over at Ambroise Method. So for that reason, I'm a little bit more paranoid. I do want to put my formula on the board. The formula that includes with compounding. So that's why we're going to use without compounding, okay? Now, 10,000 minus 9,800. So we are 200 bucks, okay? 200 bucks gonna roll over to day 2, okay? And on day 2, we did not have any transactions, no purchases or advances, no payments or credit. So 200, 200. So 200 all the way through, okay? 200 on day 3 becomes 200 on day 4. And then we did not have any transactions. 200 on day 4 stays 200, okay? So the next time we had a transaction will be on the 26th. So we're gonna have 200 all the way around. Okay. On day 25, it stays 200. Now on day 26, okay, they're going to make an advance for 7,800, which is the total expense. Okay. So on day 26, 7,800. Okay. Again, 9,800 is the income, so 9,800 comes in, 7,800 goes out. Okay. So that's the income, that's the expense. 9,800, 9,800. 7,800 goes out, 7,800. Okay? Now on day 26, 200 bucks plus 7,800. So now we're at 8,000. 8,000, since we're using the formula without compounding. So obviously there's no interest added on top of it. 800, 800 on day 27. Beginning balance, 800 ending balance, because we did not have any new transactions. Okay? 800, 800, 800, 800, 800, 800, 800. Okay, 800, 800. Okay, folks? Now, the way that these lenders arrive at the monthly interest cost for the cycle, they take a look at the APR. So the APR will be converted to a daily. So it'll be 7.75. We're talking about the HELOC. 7.75 divided by 100. And let's assume this particular lender using 365 days. So divided by 365. So now we are at, for the HELOC now, we are at 0. Move that a little closer. So 7.75 divided by 100 divided by 365. So for the HELOC, zero point zero 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 212 3288. Okay? Alright, folks? So that is the APR converted to a daily. Okay? Times the average daily balance. Now, how they arrive with the average daily balance? They add all the ending balances. Okay? So, we had 200. After day one, we did not have any transactions. So, we're going to have 200 for 25 days. Okay? Because the next time we had a transaction was on the 26th. So 200 times 25, because we don't have 225 times, okay? So 200 times 25. Let's run it. 25 times 200. So we had 5,000 here. Okay. And we have 8,000. How many 8,000 do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So 8,000 times 5. Okay. Looks like 40,000, but let's just run it. 8,000 times 5, 40,000. So altogether we had 45,000. Because 5,000 plus 40,000 is 45 when we add them up. Okay. Remember we had 30 days. 25 plus 5 is 30. Okay. So we had 45,000. That'll be the total ending balances when we add all the ending balances. We have 225 times, then we have 8,005 times. Okay? So altogether we had 45,000. Okay? So the way they arrive at the average daily balance, they add all the ending balances. So we know we had 45,000 divided by the number of days in the cycle. So 45 divided by 30. Okay? That's how we arrive at 1,500. Okay, for average daily balance. Okay, folks? Now, to get to the monthly payments charge, or at least the interest payment portion, it'll be the APR converted to a daily, which we've already done, times the average daily balance. So this one times this one times 30 days, which is the number of days in a cycle. Okay? So, 7.75 divided by 100 divided by 365. We had that number. That number times the average daily balance, which is 1,500, times the number of days in a cycle, which is 30. So for interest cost for the cycle, just the interest cost portion, will be 9.55. So $9.55. Okay. So interest cost on the lower APR line, the HELOC has the lower APR line because 7.75% is lower than 29.80%. So the result for the interest cost portion only is $9.55. Okay, folks? That was on the HELOC. Now let's do the same thing for the credit card. And again, the scenario on top is the way my competitor goes about things. Now, because my competitor completely ignored the credit card, because remember, they're going to dump all of the income onto the HELOC, and all the expenses going to go through the HELOC. So they will not have any amount going to the credit card. Because remember, they used up everything. 9,800, 9,800. They used the entire income. So there wouldn't be anything left, okay, for the credit card. Okay? Because these folks, they want to run everything through the HELOC. Okay? So same thing on the 26, 7,800, 7,800. They used up all of the expenses on the HELOC. For that reason, we're not going to have anything for the credit card. Okay? Because they used everything. Okay? We don't have anything to send to the credit card because these folks gonna dump everything onto the HELOC. Okay? So 11,200 minus 0 is still 11,200. So which means we're gonna have 11,200 all the way through. Again, we did not have any new transactions, any purchases or advances because they used it all. Any payments or credit because they used it all already. So they used up everything, so we have nothing for that set to go to the credit card. Okay? Because remember, again, these folks, they like to completely abandon the credit card. Okay? Which is wrong. Okay? So now we got 11,200 minus 0 is 11,200. We did not have any new transaction until day 26, and on day 26, they still didn't have anything going to the credit card because they used it all. They used everything. 11,200 plus 0 is still 11,200. So now we have 11,200 all the way through from day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to day 30. Okay? So now we're going to try to figure out the interest cost for that side. Okay? So 11,200 times, well, let's convert the credit card to a daily rate, 29.80%. So this time will be the credit card. 29.80, let's convert that to a daily. So 29.80 divided by 100 divided by 365. So we are at 0.0 0008164 384. Okay. So now let's add all the ending balances. Okay, so we could figure out the average daily balance. And again, it's 11,200 for 30 days this time because we did not have any new transactions, any payments or credit, and nor any purchases, okay, or advances. In this case, purchases. So 11,200 times 30 days, because we have times 30, because we have 30 of those. 11,200 times 30. Okay. We are 336. Okay. That is the total ending balances divided by the number of days in a cycle. Cycle has 30 days, so 336 divided by 30. Okay. So we are back at 11,200 for average daily balance. Okay. And again, nothing's changed. When you have the same number that repeats for the for however how many days, the average is gonna be the same number. Okay, folks. So now we've already converted the interest rate to a daily. We've already figured out average daily balance times the number of days in a cycle, which will be 30. 30 for the credit card. Okay. So it'll be this number, the APR converted to a daily, times the average, so that number, times this number. Okay. Times 11,200. So this one times this one times 30 days. Okay. So now we are at $274.32. Okay. So this number times that number times 30 days. $274.32 will be the interest cost on the higher APR line. The higher APR line was the credit card. 29.80% is higher or bigger than 7.75. Okay, so our results, $274.32. $274.32. Okay, folks. So that would be the way my competitor will go about things. Dump all of the income onto the HELOC and have all the expenses run through the HELOC. Okay? Because these folks, they have a narrow view of this debt repayment thing. Okay? They concentrate on one side and they completely forget what's happening on the other side. Okay? So when you add them up, the total interest cost for both would be, so we are 9.55 plus 274.32. So we are at $283.87. Okay? That would be the total interest cost for my competitor. For the HELOC, it's only $9.55. Meanwhile, for the credit card, it's $274.32. Why? Because they completely abandon the credit card. They completely ignore the credit card. Okay? So altogether, total expense for them over at Velocity Bank and Group would be $283.87. Okay. Now, America, I told you down below we're gonna run a different scenario down below. Okay. And again, on our method, we show zero respect to the HELOC. They started out with the HELOC. We're going to start out with the credit card, not the HELOC. We're going to start with the credit card because we understand that the credit card is a higher performer than a HELOC. So that is why we're going to start with the credit card. Okay. So anything that the credit card could handle, we're going to send to the credit card. Okay. And whatever the credit card cannot handle, this time we're going to call upon the HELOC. All right, America, so let's run some numbers. The beginning balance on day one was $11,200 for the credit card, $11,200. Okay. This time, anything that the credit card could handle, the credit card could at least handle bills, expenses that could go on the credit card. Okay. And the expenses that could go on a credit card, $6,200. Okay. And for us over at Ambroise Method, we know that cash flow, America, is better served to go to the account that has the higher APR. Well, the credit card has the higher APR. So that's why we're going to send cash flow to the credit card as well. So when we have 6,200, at least 6,200, we put it over here. So we have 6,200 plus 2,000. That's how we arrive at a total income of 8,200. 8,200. Again, all the bills or expenses that could go on the credit card plus the cash flow. So 6,200 plus the cash flow, 2,000. 8,200. Okay, folks? Yeah, I'm going a little slower because I don't want to lose anybody. So, on day one, just like our competitor always show that all the income comes in all at once. So 11,200 minus, because remember, income gonna reduce when you send income to that account. That's equivalent to a payment. So income gonna, and we know what payment does. Payment reduces the balance. So 11,200 minus 8,200. So 11,200 minus 8,200. That's how we arrive at 3,000 bucks. Okay. And again, we did not have any transaction. So 3,000 becomes 3,000. Ending balance on day one becomes 3,000. Beginning balance on day two. Okay. We did not have any new transaction on day two. 3,000, 3,000, 3,000, 3,000, 3,000, all the way through for 25 days. So on day 26, we're gonna use the credit card to pay these expenses on day 26. Okay? That is why, America, part of our prep work, when you're using Ambroise Method, is to move all the due dates towards the end of the month. Okay? And again, that does not cure anything, but he helps quite a bit. Okay? So let's assume on day 26, 6,200, which was what the credit card could handle. These are the expenses that the credit card could handle. 6,200. 6,200. So now on day 26, we have beginning balance of 3,000 plus 6,200. That's how we arrive at 9,200. So day 26, we did not have any new transactions. So 9,200, day 27, day 27. 9,200, day 28, day 28. 9,200, day 29, day 29. 9,200, day number 30 of the cycle, day number 30 of the cycle. Okay? And again, we did not have any new transactions after day 26. Okay? So now, we have 3,000 on day 1, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to day 25. Okay? So 3,000 times 25 days. Let me put it over here. Put it over here. For the credit card, so 3,000 times 25 days. Okay? Because we have 3,000 all the way through. Okay? Things did not get changed until day 26. So 3,000 times 25, so we are at 75,000. Okay? So now we have 9,200 for how many days? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So 9,200 times 5 days. Okay, again, 25 plus 5 is 30 days. Okay? So 9,200 times 5 days, we are at 46,000. Okay? And when we add them up, 75,000 plus 46,000, we are at 121,000. Okay? These are the total ending balance. 121,000. Okay? 3,000 for 25 days and 9,200 for 5 days. Okay? $121, which is the total ending balance, divided by the number of days in a cycle. That's how we're going to arrive at the average daily balance. So 121,000 divided by 30, we are at, for average daily balance, this time 4,000. $33.33. Okay? Times the number of days in a cycle. So let's figure out what the interest charge portion only going to be on a credit card. So it was the APR converted to a daily, so 29.80. So we arrive at that number. Times the average daily balance, which is $4,033.33, times the number of days in a cycle, which is 30 days. So our interest cost on the credit card is $98.79. So we are over here now. This is Velocity Banking. This is Ambroise Method. So $98.79. Okay, folks, that's the interest cost on the higher APR line. The higher APR line is the credit card, 29.80%. Okay. Now, the terminology that we use in America when we have to divide the income, at least the expense, into at least two separate parts, it's a terminology that we refer to as let me put it down here. Ambroise's partitioning an expense that's when we divide the expense into at least two separate parts. The total expense, $7,800. We're gonna divide that expense into at least two separate parts, where one of the parts will equal bills, expenses that could go on a credit card. Okay, so it'll be 6,200 plus. So if we have 7,800, which was the total expense, minus 6,200. So now we're going to have 1,600. Okay, that is Ambroise's partitioning an expense. It is to divide the total expense, which is 7,800, into at least two separate parts. 1, 2. Where one of the parts will equal bills that could go on a credit card, at least that amount. Okay, so 6,200 could go on a credit card. The remainder, this time we're gonna send the remainder to the HELOC, and the remainder is 1,600. Again, we're going to partition that expense. So 6,2. So on the 26th, we're going to send 1,600 to the HELOC. You see that? 6,200 plus 1,600. That's how we arrive at 7,800, which is the total expense. Spirit of Father, thank you. America, this is Ambroise's partitioning an expense. We're gonna send whatever portion that the credit card could handle, which is 6,200. Okay, whatever amount that the credit card could handle. Okay, 6,200, $200 is the amount for bills, expenses that could go on a credit card. The remainder, this time we're gonna send the remainder to the HELOC. Again, folks, Ambroise's partitioning a balance is to divide the balance into at least two separate parts. 1, 2. Where one of the parts will go will be bills, expenses that could go on a credit card. 6,200, 6,200. So that's why we have the remainder, 1,600, going to the HELOC. Okay. So the credit card has priority. So in this scenario, the credit card will be the senior partner. The HELOC will be the junior partner, for lack of a better term. Okay. So the credit card has priority. Because of our Ambroise method, again, we understood that head-to-head, the credit card wins. In other words, the credit card is a higher performer than the HELOC. Okay? So that's why we are showing zero respect to the HELOC. Unlike our competitor that likes to dump all of the income onto the HELOC. Look at us. The total income, 9,800. For us, it's only going to be 8,200. But it's not going to the HELOC. It's going to the credit card. Because the credit card has priority on our method. Well, it depends on the scenario, but 99% of the time, the credit card has priority. Okay. So 8,200. And same thing, we're going to also partition that income. This time we're going to partition in the income into at least two separate parts. Where one of the parts will equal amount that the credit card could handle. The credit card could handle 6,200. Because at some point the credit card has to pay that, pay those bills, so we could dump that income into the credit card, and we could also dump the cash flow into the credit card, like I mentioned earlier. That's how we arrive at 8,200. But the total income, folks, was 9,800, not 8,200. So which means now the remainder gonna go this time to the HELOC. Okay, so when we go 9,800 minus 8,200, that's how we arrive at 1,600. So 8,2 plus 16, 8,200 plus 1,600 is 9,800. So not only we partitioning the expense, we also partitioning the income, because we want a little bit to go to the credit card, because the credit card a lot of times cannot handle everything. In this particular example, the credit card cannot handle everything. So we're going to send whatever the credit card cannot handle this time to the HELOC. So we're partitioning the income and we're partitioning the expense. You see that, America? Now, on this side, we've already figured out what our interest cost for the cycle will be on the credit card. Now we're going to try to figure out what our interest cost is going to be on the lower APR line, which is the HELOC. Okay. America, whenever we have the same dollar amount of income, 1,600, and the same dollar amount of expenses, 1,600, 1,600, 1,600. We refer to that technique as Ambroise's wash technique. Lord Jesus, I know I deserve judgment. So thank you for showing me mercy, mercy, mercy. In Jesus' name, amen. Folks, 1,600 of income coming in, 1,600 of expenses going out. That is a technique on our method that we refer to as Ambroise's wash technique. Again, same dollar amount of income coming in, same dollar amount of expenses going out. Okay. 16 goes in, 16 comes out. It's a wash. Hence the name Ambroise's wash technique. Hopefully after this lesson, these little rookies over at Velocity Banking Group will stop harassing me on YouTube, sending me messages all the time, you know, thinking that they have something great when they dump all of the income onto an HELOC. You guys need to sit down and watch the professor go at it. Bunch of rookies trying to challenge me on YouTube. Alright, America, so now on day one, we have 1,600 coming in, this time to the HELOC. And on day 26, we have the remainder that the credit card could not handle going this time to the HELOC. On day 26. So now let's try to figure out our numbers, America. So 10,000 minus 1,600, that's how we arrive at 8,400. 8,400 becomes the beginning balance on day 2. 8,400, 8,400. We did not have any new transaction all the way to day 26. Alright, so 8,000 all the way through. Alright, folks. So this time we're dealing with the HELOC. So how many 8,400 that we have? We're going to have 8,400 for 25 days. Again, it stays the same all the way to day 25. It changes on day 26, talking about the ending balance. Okay? So now we have 8,400 times 25 days. Then we have on day 26, 1,600 goes up to take care of the bills. 8,400 plus 1,600, because when you send that amount to pay the bill, it's gonna increases the balance on the HELOC. So that is why now we're back at 10,000. So how many 10,000 do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 10,000 times 5. Okay. Let's do the first one first. 8,400 times 25. We're at 210,000. 10,000 times 5. Looks like we're at 50. Well, let's run it just for good measure. So we're at 50. Okay? So 210 plus 50. We are at 260. Okay? That is the total ending balance when we add all the balances. 8,400, 25 times. And then on day 26, again, it changes. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So all together, when we add all the ending balances, we had 260,000 divided by the number of days in a cycle to arrive at the average daily balance. So 260 divided by 30. So we are at, for average daily balance, it's going to be $8,666.67. Okay? Times the number of days in a cycle. So to get to to get to the monthly interest cost is going to be the HELOC converted to a daily times the average daily balance times the number of days in the cycle. So this number times that number times this number. Okay. So again, 7.75 divided by 100 divided by 365. So we are over here. Okay. Times the average daily balance times 866667, 866667 times 30 days. Okay. So our interest cost on the lower APR line, the lower APR line is the HELOC. The HELOC 7.75% is $55.21. Okay. Now, on the credit card, which is the higher APR line, we arrive at 98.79. On the HELOC, we arrive at 55.21. Our total, when we add them up, 98.79 plus 55.21. Our total interest is $154. Good. We run my numbers one more time, making sure I did not make any mistakes. Any mistake? All right. $55.21, perfect. And this one, we were at 260. 866667, perfect. 866667, awesome. Okay, folks. Now, let's take a look at their results. This is my competitor, Velocity Banking Group. And let's take a look at our results. Okay. On the interest cost portions only. Interest cost on the lower APR line for my competitor, because they will start with the HELOC. Then the interest cost on the higher APR line. And again, because they completely ignore the credit card, that will be the interest cost. Just the interest cost portion only. When we add them up, we had $283.87, which was $9.55 for the HELOC. And $274.32 for on the credit card. Altogether, $283.87. Okay. Over here, interest cost on the higher APR line. The higher APR line is the credit card, and the lower APR line is the HELOC. Again, folks, this is Velocity Banking Group. This is Ambroise Method. Okay. On the credit card, the interest cost portion, $98.79. On the HELOC, the interest cost, $55.21. Okay. Altogether, our total interest cost, $154. All right, America, let's take a look at our results, and let's take a look at their results. The total interest cost for them will be $283.87. The total interest cost for us will only be $154. Smaller is better. So they're only gonna be charging us $154, while they'll be charging them $283.87. So they're being charged more interest for no reason. Why? Because they're doing, again, this nonsense about dumping all of the income or all of the paychecks onto a HELOC, which is equivalent of madness. Let's see how much the difference is. 283.87 minus 154. A difference of 100. Let me put that a little bigger here. 129.87. You could do a lot with 100, almost 130 bucks. For the cycle. That's how much we're saving. Why? Because we're doing one little tweak. Okay? Because again, America, on our method, we understood that the credit card is a higher performer a lot of times than the HELOC. Why? Because the credit card is generally, the credit card typically has a higher APR than a HELOC. And again, America, whenever you have the options, from past lesson we've done line versus another line, okay? Between two lines, a credit card, that's a revolving credit account. A HELOC, that's also a revolving credit account for our purpose when the HELOC is in a draw period. So, two revolving credit accounts. So a line versus another line. When you have a line, America, versus another line, okay, your movement of income and movement of expenses, okay, which is income coming in and expenses going out, that movement should happen first inside the higher APR line. That is why we reverse the order. For them, it's HELOC, then credit card. But for us, well, it's not even credit card for them because they completely ignored it. For us, it's credit card, then the HELOC. You see? They start with HELOC, we start with credit card. Okay? Because we recognize that the credit card, again, is a higher performer. Okay? In other words, the credit card is a better debt tool than the HELOC with regards to movements of income and movement of expenses. Let me use that terminology. With income coming in and expenses going out. Okay? So these folks, they're going from something better to something worse for dumping all of the income onto the HELOC. And again, folks, this is equivalent to madness. The numbers don't lie. The numbers don't lie. All right, America. This is Ambroise Method. Okay? Gotta know how to run numbers, folks. Okay? That way you could stop doing this nonsense that my competitor is doing. Okay? And on the board, we're using the average daily balance, including new transaction, without compounding. And just like I've done from past lessons, you know that the overall results for average daily balance, including new transaction with compounding, gonna be the same. The credit card's still going to win. Okay? So whether a lender is using without compounding or with compounding as part of how they arrive at the monthly interest cost for the cycle, the overall result's still gonna be the same. The credit card's still going to win. Okay? So for that reason, the credit card has to be the senior partner. Okay? The HELOC will be the junior partner. Okay, folks? All right, America, I'll give you about 5-10 seconds to take a look at what's on the board, and then we're going to continue with the exercise. All right, America. Now, for those of you who wonder, well, maybe it's because the income is 8,200. That's why the results on that side is better. Okay. It doesn't matter what the income, well, this income, even if this income was, let's do cash flow plus 1,000. Cash flow is 2,000 plus 1,000. Let's say the income was only 3,000. So cash flow 2,000 plus an additional 1,000 that could take care of other bills, other expenses. Okay? So 2,000 in cash flow plus 1,000 to cover bills, expenses that could go on a credit card. Okay? So instead of 8,200, we'll have 3,000 total for income going to the credit card. Okay? Your results still will be better. Okay? So which means if you have 3,000 going here, let's see, 3K here, so 9,800 minus 3K, it looks like 6,800 will be going there. Okay. Even if the income going to the credit card, even if it was a lower amount compared to the income going to the HELOC, okay, the results still gonna be, I'm talking about the overall results, still gonna be better on that side. Okay? So don't think it's because it's such a high income, okay, that's why the credit card wins. Doesn't matter, so long it's cash flow plus an amount. The amount could be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Okay? The overall results on that side will be better. In other words, you will have a smaller interest cost on that side compared to this one. Okay? All right? So at your free time, you could run different scenarios where you add cash flow, because remember, cash flow is better served in a higher APR account. So you could do cash flow plus something on top, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Okay? Just run the numbers. Okay? Doesn't even have to be 1,000. It could be like 500 bucks, 600 bucks, 700 bucks, 800 bucks, 900 bucks. Okay? You're still gonna have better results over here. Okay? Because again, the credit card is a higher performer than the HELOC. Okay? Over here, they didn't have anything going to the credit card. Over here, on our side, you're going to have something going to the credit card. Okay? All right. Now, Remember, folks, I mentioned from past lessons, from past case studies, that your traditional trade lines are always in competition with themselves to see which account gets to receive what. The traditional trade lines, America, these are the items that gets reported on your credit report. Okay? For example, the credit card will get reported to the credit report. The HELOC will be reported on your credit report. So those are your traditional trade lines. Okay. They're always in competition with themselves. Okay. So that is why whenever, before you do anything at all, okay, understand first why you have on the board. Okay. Don't get carried away, America, because the HELOC offer greater liquidity than the credit card. Okay? And again, you could dump all your income onto the HELOC and you could dump all of the expenses onto the HELOC. So the HELOC offers greater liquidity than a credit card. Meanwhile, for most credit cards, depends on the example, you could dump some income onto the credit card, but you cannot have all the expense, because a lot of times not every bills, not every expenses can be paid with a credit card. Okay, so the credit card is limited a lot of times. Okay, so even though the credit card is limited, okay, that is why on my last lesson I've shown you guys that head to head the credit card wins. So that is why you need to send to the credit card again whatever amount or whatever portion that the credit card could handle. And we figured out that the portion that the credit card could handle was the expense, $6,200, plus the cashier, which was an additional $2,000. So altogether, we arrive at an income of $8,200 that could be sent to the credit card. Okay, and again, it was 6,200 plus 2,000. Okay, so we are 8,200. Okay, 8,200. All right, folks. Again, your traditional trade lines, they are always in competition with themselves to see which account gets to receive what. Okay, so don't rush in. Okay, and start dumping all the income onto the HELOC. You gotta take a look to see what you have on the board first. Okay, sometimes we have revolving credit account on the board. Sometimes we have installment credit account on the board. When it's revolving credit account, 99% of the time, just send everything to the higher APR line, because a line versus another line, you know, in the case of a credit card versus a HELOC, the credit card will win 99% of the time. Depends on the example. Now, if it was a installment loan, installment account, and a revolving account, okay, this time you have to run the numbers, okay, to see, because remember, on an installment account, you don't have the luxury of having movement of income and movement of expenses. On a revolving credit account like a HELOC, you could have income coming in, expenses going out. But for installment, you cannot have income coming in and expenses going out. So for that reason, you have to run the numbers, okay? Don't just take a look at the APR when it comes to installment credit account. For installment, you have to actually run the numbers, okay? Especially if the APRs are kind of close, okay? Because one of them, movements might make a difference, okay? But if on the installment credit account, the interest rate is so large or significantly higher than the interest rate on a revolving credit account, okay, then you know that most of your numbers should be going to the installment credit account. I'm talking about the cash flow portion plus the minimum payment on the installment credit account itself. But in any event, if it's an installment and a revolving, you have to run the numbers. So just keep that in mind. If it's if the accounts are different, You have to run the numbers. If the accounts are the same, okay, line and another line, okay, 99% of the time, just pick the higher line, okay, 99% of the time. All right. Another observation that I've made a few weeks ago, I've noticed some of the folks teaching about Velocity Banking Group. These people, obviously, you know, they do not have any consensus on how they go about their business. I see one financial coach teaching about that stuff. The way that they arrive at the monthly interest cost for the cycle on an HELOC, they add, for example, say that in this example the HELOC is 10,000. Let me put it over here. So the HELOC is 10,000. They have income coming in. Let's say income 9,800. So now the result is 200, just like we have here. How to figure out their average, they took that number plus this number. Since it's two numbers, they add these two numbers up divided by 2 as part of what they use to arrive at the average. Okay? You have another group. So this one was the income. This group, they completely ignore the expense. They have that 9,800 coming in. This 7,800 for expenses, they don't even take it into account at all. So that's why they only have two numbers. They have one number here and one number there. So they add those two numbers up divided by 2. Okay? And they use part of that number times some other items to arrive at their average. So for them, they're doing divided by 2. You have another group, like I've done from past lesson. This time they're going to add the beginning balance, which was 10,000. And the new balance, which is 200. This time they're going to include the expense. So they're going to come back to 10,000 again because the expense is 7,800. So because as part of the formula, these folks, they use the income and they use the expense plus the original amount. Okay, I'm just doing a summary of what they're doing. So it says they have 3 different numbers. Okay, so they're doing divided by 3. So you have one group, one faction teaching about velocity banking. For their average, they're doing divided by 2. You have another faction, America. For their average, they're doing divided by 3. So one doing divided by 2 as part of their formula, another one doing divided by 3 as part of their formula on how they arrive at the average daily balance. Folks, and again, these people, they have no consensus on how they go about their business. Okay? You have one faction divided by 2. you have another fraction divided by 3. Okay. Well, which one is right? Actually, they both are wrong. None of them got it right. They both are wrong. Why? Because we know that most lenders, most creditors, they don't use that formula on how they arrive at the monthly interest cost for the cycle. So if the banks or the creditor themselves are not using this kind of formula, why are the folks over at Velocity Banking Group using that formula? Because most lenders, most creditors, okay, most uses an average daily balance, including new transaction with compounding, okay? And the way they arrive at the average daily balance, it's not divided by 2, it's not divided by 3, okay? Now, when you're in a hurry, like I mentioned from past lessons, you could do some silly things like that. Divided by 2, divided by 3. Well, this one's completely wrong, so don't you be using this one at all. Because this one doesn't take into account the expense. Okay, these folks, they only take into account the income coming in. Okay, they don't show the expense at all. These guys over here, at least they use income and they use expense. Okay, so this one will be a little bit better, even though they're both wrong. Okay, but the group that I use divided by 3, okay, is a better group than the group that I use divided by 2 on how they arrive at the average for them. So it's divided by 2 times some other numbers. For them it's divided by 3 and some other items. Okay, so this group is better than this group. Okay, so this one's just better. The one that does divided by 3 to arrive at an average. Okay. But again, they both are wrong because the lender themselves don't use that kind of formula. Okay. So if the lenders themselves don't use that kind of formula, at least most lenders, okay, so why are these folks using that kind of formula? Okay. You cannot make up your own thing. That is why when you run in actual numbers, okay, the results were always going to be whatever they arrive at for average for them is always going to be different. And we've gone over that from past lessons to where their average was one number and our actual average was a different number. Why? Because they're using an average on top of another average. Okay? And for us over at Ambroise Method, we're using the actual number for the average. Okay? So that's why on one example, I can't remember which example that I've used, where our average was totally different than their average. Okay? And again, folks, if you're in a hurry, okay, I guess you could use this one. Okay? Not that one. Okay? Because these folks, they don't even take into account the expense as part of their formula to arrive at the average daily balance. Okay? Alright folks, I just wanted to briefly touch on that because with all those different factions over at Velocity Banking, you know, each faction is doing their own little thing, you know. And again, these folks, no cohesive message at all, no consensus on how to arrive at things. Now, another thing, America. A lot of times these folks over at Velocity Banking, they are going to ask you to go out there and acquire a new HELOC. Go out there and acquire a new PLOC. Go out there and you acquire a first in HELOC. Go out there and acquire life insurance to pay off debt. Remember, America, a lot of times you do not need to go out there and acquire new trade lines to pay off debt. Okay. Now, in some scenario, in some applications, it is again advisable to go out there and get an HELOC, PLOC, BLOC. Okay. But a lot of times you don't need to go apply for new trade lines to pay off debt. Okay. A lot of times. Okay, folks. Now, I'm not saying they do not have any use, like I mentioned from past lessons. Okay. In some applications, yes, you could go out there, get a new HELOC, get a new PLOC. Okay. In some applications. Because remember, a lot of times you could achieve the same thing with a credit card. Okay. Because a lot of credit card companies are offering 0% balance transfers. Okay. As far as movement, you know the credit card will be better. But with regards to the consolidation part or the transfer portion, okay, a lot of times on a credit card you could get 0% promotional rate. A lot of times you could get 1.99% promotional rate on a credit card. Okay, and the longer the better. 12 months, 18 months, 15 months, 18 months, 24 months. So the longer the better. Okay? So depends on what you have. Okay? If you don't, if your expenses, your debts are not all that great, I'm talking about as far as the amount of debt that you have. Okay? So that's why I said depends on the example, because you could achieve pretty much the same thing with a credit card. Okay? But you might make a difference if you have a lot of debts. Okay? And for someone who has a house, okay, or even a mobile home in some area, okay? So if you have a house and you have a lot of equity and you have a lot of debts, okay? So in an example, an example like this, then an HELOC, it might be advisable to go out there and get an HELOC. Okay? Because you could knock out most of these bills, most of these expenses. Because if you have a lot of equity, the equity is so large. Okay. Remember, you are exchanging a lot of times a lower APR for a higher APR. Okay. And on a credit card, okay, 0% APR, 0% promotional, or 1.99. The credit limit may not be all that great. Okay. But if you're lucky to where they give you a big credit limit, okay, so it depends on the example. Okay, you could achieve the same thing with a credit card. Okay. All right, America. I'll give you about 5-10 seconds to take a look at what's on the board, and then we're going to continue with the exercise. All right, America. So this obsession, fixations on HELOC, PLOC, BLOC from my competitor, okay? With regards to movement, okay? We prove to you guys that the credit card will be better and the results don't lie, okay? So again, like I mentioned from past lessons, the HELOC the PLOC, the BLOC, all-in-one loan, first lien HELOC, where he has a one-way sweep, first lien HELOC, two-way sweep, okay. Infinite banking concept, infinite banking concept coupled with an all-in-one loan. Okay. All these accounts, America, are poor performing debt to. Okay. The HELOC, just like we've shown you guys in this example, a poor performing debt tool because the credit card as a senior partner will be better. Okay. The PLOC, personal line of credit, poor performing debt tool. The BLOC, business line of credit, poor performing debt tool, all-in-one loan. Okay. Poor performing debt tool because the interest rate on all-in-one loan will be similar to the interest rate on the HELOC. In other words, the interest rate on the all-in-one loan will be smaller than the interest rate on the credit card. Okay, remember, a line versus a line, your movement 99% of the time should happen inside the higher APR line. Okay, so this one, the interest rate will be lower. Okay, so the results will be similar, just like we have on the HELOC. Okay, first in HELOC, the old ones with a one-way sweep. Okay, sometimes all-in-one loan and first in HELOC. Sometimes these two terminologies are interchangeable. Sometimes they could be the same product. Sometimes they could be different product. Okay, or slight variations. Okay, first in HELOC, one-way sweep. First in HELOC, two-way sweep. Poor performing debt tool. Infinite banking concept. Okay, and again, folks, this idea to go out there get a life insurance policy to pay off debt. No, because there are better products out there to where you could go out there in the market and do better than this infinite banking concept. Okay? Coupled with an all-in-one loan. Okay? Poor performing debt tool. Alright? And again, like I mentioned from past lesson, the all-in-one loan, the interest rate will be lower. APR are typically lower than, say, a credit card. Let me put that a little bigger here. So APR are typically lower. Okay? And again, folks, the results will be similar. Okay? Compared to a credit card. Alright? So that is why all these accounts will be a poor performing debt tool when you have other accounts on the board where the APR is considerably higher than the APR on these accounts. Okay? When it's a line versus a line, the APR doesn't have to be considerably higher. The APR just has to be a little higher. Okay? With installment loans, then you have to run the numbers. But with a line versus another line, okay, 99% of the time, just send the payment or just run most of your numbers, okay, to the credit card line as opposed to the HELOC, as opposed to the PLOC, as opposed to the BLOC, as opposed to sending everything to all-in-one loan, first in HELOC one-way sweep, first in HELOC two-way sweep, infinite banking coupled with an all-in-one loan, or infinite banking concept working in conjunction with an all-in-one loan. And again, folks, all these accounts would be poor performing debt to. Okay? Alright, folks? So, and again, America, don't be doing this nonsense about dumping all your income or all of your paycheck onto an HELOC. Okay? When we have another line on the board with considerably higher APR. Okay, folks? Now, based on the results, you know that the folks over at Velocity Banking Group will never ever be able to compete with us. Okay? And again, folks, the results don't lie. Okay? Now, let's do a quick comparison. Let's see. Now, let me put it over here. With our method and the other inferior method that's out there. Let's see if I could. So we have debt snowball. This group only uses cash flow. Okay? So they only use cash flow. So we have debt avalanche. This group, remember America, when you're paying off debt, you're going to come across three main elements, three main assignments, three main jobs: transfer, alternative account, cash flow. This group only uses cash flow as well. Okay. So that's 1 out of 3, or 33%. Okay. Same thing here, 1 out of 3, 33%. Okay. For debt snowball, they're going to send cash flow to the lowest balance account. Lowest balance account is the HELOC. For debt avalanche, they're going to send cash flow to the higher APR account. Higher APR account is the credit card. Okay. And remember, we have 3 items. Okay, folks? So you have to take advantage of all 3. Okay? At some point. So these folks, the folks of our debt snowball group, they do not go far enough in eliminating debt quickly because they're only taking advantage of 1 out of 3 items, 33%. So they are not turning in all of the assignments, all of the elements, all of the jobs. Okay, and again, folks, when you're paying off debt, you're gonna come across a lot of times 3 main assignment, 3 main elements, 3 main jobs. Okay. Same thing, debt avalanche, 1 out of 3. 1, 2, 3, they're only taking advantage of cash flow only. Okay, 33%. For Velocity Banking Group, these folks, they're taking advantage of transfer. They refer to it as chunking. They're taking advantage of the alternative account. They refer to it as debt weapon or debt tool, or line or credit line or debt destroyer. And cash flow, they're taking advantage of cash flow. Okay. But these folks, they're going about it the wrong way. Okay. For them, they have this obsession, fixation on HELOC, VLOC, PLOC. So since we have an HELOC on the board, for chunking, at some point you'll be out of the HELOC. For debt weapon, they'll dump all of the income onto the HELOC, and all the expense will go through the HELOC. Okay? And for cash flow, this HELOC will keep cash flow. 9 and 8, cash flow was 2,000. Cash flow would be here. Okay. As you could see, they have HELOCs everywhere. This is why we refer to America as favoritism. Okay. Remember, chunking is a job. The tool that you use for your debt weapon, that's another job. Cash flow, which account gets to keep cash flow, that's another job. These are 3 separate jobs. Okay. For that reason, you have to use the account or accounts that are best suited for the job. Okay. For us over at Ambroise Method, transfer, we're going to do the transfer out of the HELOC. So they have HELOC, we have HELOC. As far as alternative account, okay, we understood that the HELOC is the credit card, is a higher performer than the HELOC. So we're going to use the credit card first. Credit card has priority. So the credit card will be the senior partner and the HELOC will be the junior partner. Okay? So we'll figure out what needs to go to the credit card first. And whatever the credit card could not handle, this time we're going to send it to the HELOC. Okay? And as far as cash flow, cash flow is better served in the account that has the higher APR. So that'll be the credit card. Okay? So that's why we have cash flow inside here. The 6.2 that the credit card could handle plus the 2,000. That's how we arrive at 8,200. So cash flow goes inside that credit card. Okay? So, you see? HELOC. For us, HELOC, credit card, HELOC, credit card. So our process at America is totally different than what our competitors is doing. Okay? So, in other words, our competitors chooses the wrong account. For debt weapon, they have HELOC. For debt weapon, we have the credit card as a senior partner first. Okay? And any extra that the credit card could not handle, we'll send that extra to the HELOC. Okay? And again, cash flow inside the HELOC, inside the credit card. Alright? So, this is for this example. Now, for our method overall, for transfer, we have at least 7 different ways on how we execute balance transfer. Okay? For alternative account, sometimes we use 1 alternative account, 2 alternative account, 3 alternative account. That's a lesson I haven't covered yet. The third, 3 alternative accounts simultaneously, that's a lesson I haven't covered. But in this lesson, I've shown you guys how to use 2 alternative accounts at the same time. The credit card, senior partner, the HELOC, junior partner. So 1 alternative account, so that's having movement of income and movement of expenses, and 2 separate accounts at the same time. Movement of income, movement of expenses. Movement of income, movement of expenses. Okay? So in this example, we're going to be using 2. And another lesson I haven't covered, I'm not sure if I'm going to cover this lesson on YouTube. Maybe I'll reserve that lesson, America, for my financial coaches. When I start doing training for financial coach, maybe that's when I'm going to cover that lesson. So in other words, I might release it to the general public, or I might reserve it only for financial coach. Okay? When I'm doing training for financial coach. Okay? And as far as cash flow went to the credit card, so the higher APR ones. in this particular example. Okay. So not only we are doing everything better than our competitors, those guys, they don't go far enough. That snowball group, they don't go far enough in eliminating debt quickly. They're only taking advantage of one item. That avalanche, they do not go far enough in eliminating debt quickly because they're only taking advantage of one item, which is cash flow. Velocity banking group, they're taking advantage of 3 separate items, but they're going about it the wrong way. Okay, this obsession about HELOC, PLOC, BLOC. Okay. Because these folks, they like to go blindly and do things. They never like to run the numbers. Okay. 283.87, 154. Okay, folks. So not only are we doing everything better than they are, chunking, HELOC, nothing changed there. We have the same results that they have. Except a lot of times they're only doing 1, and sometimes we do up to 7. Well, we have 7 different ways, 7 different type of transfers. Debt weapon, they have 1 debt weapon. In this particular example, we use 2. 1, 2. So which debt repayment method, America, are you think gonna go past the finish line first? We having more items than they are. They have just 1, we have 2. Because remember, each time you have movement of income and movement of expenses in these accounts, you're saving more interest. And again, the numbers don't lie. Okay? So we're having better results than they are. Okay? And cash flow went to HELOC. Cash flow gonna go to credit card. Okay? So we're doing everything better than they are. And we're having better results than they are. Okay? So again, the folks of our Velocity Banking Group, America, they will never be able to compete with us. Not in a million years. Okay? Truly over at Ambroise Method, we are a different kind of talent. Okay? That's when you're able to master this thing. Okay? That's why I'm able to break it down so easily. By the grace of God. Alright, America. I'll give you about 5-10 seconds to take a look at what's on the board, and then we're going to continue with the exercise. Alright, America. Again, my name is James Ambroise. I am the author, creator of Ambroise Method 1.0 and Ambroise Method 2.0. Ambroise Method is a revolutionary debt repayment method that offers greater results in terms of reducing interest cost. And we proved it here. In terms of reducing interest cost, lower interest cost than this one. Okay? Compared to debt snowball, debt avalanche, velocity banking. Thank you, Jesus. Until next time, America. Good morning.